if you hear nothing else, I want you to hear your sexual innocence can be recovered. Your innocence can be recovered. You aren't too far gone. And I want to invite you to get angry at the voices of shame that say, sorry, you're too broken. You're too much of a mess. You're too perverted, too disgusting, too dirty. That's straight from hell.
Welcome to the Care for Pastors podcast. We're glad you're here. Our vision is simple but powerful: to see pastoral families persevere in ministry, develop healthy churches, and lead in community transformation. This podcast exists to encourage you, challenge you, and provide practical resources along with real stories of hope to help you and your family thrive. Our heart is not just that you would survive ministry, but that you would prevail in your personal life, your family, and in your calling. So stay tuned for today's episode, hosted by Robby Bolden. Today we continue our powerful conversation with Sam Jolman, author of the book, The Sex Talk You Never Got. Last week in part 1, we talked about shame, sexual formation, and the ways both permissive culture and purity culture have shaped and often wounded our understanding of sexuality. We moved beyond behavior and began asking deeper questions about sexual formation and our heart. Today we turn the corner towards healing. If you've ever wondered, why do I keep going back to the same old struggle? Is this really just about lust? Why do I feel so much shame? And is recovery even possible for someone like me? If that's been your question, then today's conversation is for you. In this episode, Sam helps us unpack the connection between sexual struggle and emotional regulation, why pornography is often an attempt at comfort rather than simply rebellion, and how curiosity, not condemnation, becomes a pathway towards transformation. We'll talk about soothing, story, fantasy, core wounds, and what it really means to reclaim masculine sexuality. And most importantly, we'll end with hope, the powerful truth that sexual innocence can be recovered. If you're a pastor carrying private battles while publicly leading others, lean in. This is not a conversation about beating you up. It's about breaking silence and stepping towards grace. Let's jump into part 2 of our conversation with Sam Jolman. Well, welcome back to the Care for Pastors podcast, and I'm joined once again by Sam, who has been here to talk about his new book, The Sex Talk You Never Got. And I think we all remember in elementary school maybe that the sex talk day at school, and that was kind of awkward. I can tell you that right now. It was it led to a lot of snickers and cutting up from the boys' side of this class. I can tell you that. So Sam, thanks for joining us today, and I want to thank you for our last episode, and so today we want to kind of turn the conversation towards healing, and I remember growing up in the 80s and 90s, and then even with my own daughters. I have 3 daughters. You know, the big push within the church was the purity culture, right? Which we thought, hey, we've treated sex as a weapon that needed to be handled carefully, and we made people fearful of it. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's led to a lot of challenges in many Christian homes. And so today, I'd like for us, you know, in your book, you contrast the permissive culture to the pure to the purity culture, which both of them are not the answer. So, right. Would you speak into that and kind of tell us why the purity culture didn't work?
Yeah, you know, the purity culture was, of course, intended well. It is this idea of how do we rise to what God calls us to? How do we live pure, right? Be pure as God is pure, right? How do we live that way? And so it was an attempt to create a sexual ethic. Somewhat people have said in the wake of the sexual revolution, right? And in this kind of casual treatment of sexuality. So it was intended well, but unfortunately, it often burdened people with overly condemning messages. For example, for women, right? If we were to just summarize it briefly, the message is, you know, you're a walking temptation for men, right? You need to be very aware, you know, of modesty and saving yourself, and you need to be the brakes. You need to be aware that you're not tempting men to go too far, or if you're in a relationship, that you're guarding men's hearts. And it was all about men. It was all about making sure your body is covered, sometimes to extremes. But the implicit message was your sexuality is inherently harmful. Your sexuality, your body, is dirty. It causes harm. And we equated virginity as well with purity, right? And we made those the same thing. They are not, right? And in fact, we never started with saying, oh, by the way, nobody's pure. That's the whole gospel, right? We get purity as the fruit of our salvation at the end of time, ultimately. So, but we said purity is virginity. So make sure you save yourself. And for men, right, the message was essentially you're going to lust. Almost, to be scared of everything that moves in you, right? Because it's probably lust. If you felt feelings for that girl, it's, oh my gosh, that's probably the beginning of lust, and you need to shut it down. And it's a sense of, well, it's every man's battle. And, you need to figure out how to shut all that down. And so it inadvertently harmed the body for both men and women, condemned the body. And, what's happened, and there's evidence now, that it led to literal physical problems. People who are entering marriage, in the wake of that, trying to now suddenly turn it all on, right? And to actually have a good script for their sex life, right? Because even their purity culture would show up as, well, you've got to make sure a man has his, every 72 hours, his vitamin, he needs a release, right? And it again put pressure on women, and it made men seem so kind of animalistic, like they need sex every 72 hours or they can't handle it and they're going to have an affair, right? And again, it's awful in both parts. So, something was left out there. Now, again, in the permissive culture, there's not good either. They're not honoring the body. There's nothing sacred or reverent about that either. So, I would say, what we left out was awe, as I talked about last time. It's the sense that you were made for pleasure. It's okay that your body feels things, and you need to be aware of how to join pleasure to reverence.
Yeah. I loved your book, and when you made the analogy of, or not the analogy, but that you defined what lust was. Can you do that for our audience? Because I learned something there, and I thought it was really helpful because God made beautiful people.
Yes.
He made us to be attracted to one another.
Yes.
And in that purity culture, you grew up thinking, well, that's a good looking girl, I can't look at her. Or that's a good looking guy over there, and it's like, God, what? God, you made these girls are too pretty. And,
right.
And so we blame God, and that's not what God wanted.
Right. Right. At some level, this is again from Dan Allender, who said, lust is desire gone mad. Right. In other words, it takes a good desire and makes it crazy, to go mad. Because ironically, the same language used of lust, Paul says, you should lust after the spiritual gifts. It's the same word, and we translate it eagerly desire. Right. In other words, he's using a good, lust as a good thing. It's, you should lust after the spiritual gifts. So we have an understanding there's something good here, right? And the good in it is desire. Now, if you go mad with desire, that's different. But even Jesus, I think it's the Bible Project guys who I can honor for this translation. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, any man who looks lustfully at a woman, right, is guilty of adultery. The sentiment that the Bible Project guys tease out there is it's more goes on looking for the sake of lust. Meaning it's not just noticing a beautiful woman, it's actually continuing to look to devour, right? That's that madness part, right? It's not just that I felt something. It's that now I'm going to carry it on. I'm going to join it and I'm going to participate in it. And I'm going to actually cultivate something in my head, a fantasy, right? Fantasy lust.
You use the word, I think I heard you use the word in your book, coveting that person.
Yes, that it's a form of covetousness.
Yes.
Right? That you're treating that person like property. And meaning an object, not a person. And so, the other thing I would say there's some research by a woman named Sheila Gregoire who says, she did some research asking, is lust every man's battle? Is it really true? And so she asked men to self-report on their experience of lust. 80% said, yes, it's a daily struggle, which is not every man, but that's pretty high, pretty close to every man. But when she actually did some research on and asked follow-up questions of like, what do you mean? Right? Like what lust behavior are you talking about? And she gave all these examples of like, you see a woman bend over in the store and you see her cleavage, or, a situation like that. What are you saying you're doing? That's lust. And she discovered that only 33% of men, so 80% said they lust every day, only 33% could actually write out, documented lust behavior. And her conclusion was, it seems like most men believe they're lusting when they're actually just noticing. Meaning, like, to say, wow, that's a beautiful woman, is not a statement of lust. And here again is where purity culture got things wrong. Arousal is not lust inherently. You can take arousal to lust. But even to feel arousal, even to feel sexually stirred, is not inherently an act of lust. No, it's something to be certainly aware of in your own body. And you have to do something with it, right? But you can notice beauty and move on. You don't have to make it into lust. And so I would say that's the joining of pleasure with reverence, right? Back to that word awe. I think you can have awe for another person and it not be a form of lust. I think you can say, wow, right? About their body, but also about their singing, their intellect, right? Their perseverance, right? In other words, it's not just physical beauty we're talking about, but I think we're actually meant to be moved by each other, right? Back to Paul's words, we all with unveiled faces reflect the Lord's glory with ever increasing glory. We're meant to move each other. We're meant to mirror God's glory to each other. And so you're meant to feel awe and moved. And that doesn't have to be lust. That can actually lead you to worship God and say thank you, right? For the intellect, beauty, voice, etc. of this person.
Yeah, I think that's hard for us to get our minds around because we've been so indoctrinated with this idea that to acknowledge beauty is to lust. And that's not what scripture teaches, and that's not what you're talking about today.
Right. And I would say there are women who have suffered the absence of men and men's gazes, even men's eye contact, men's conversations, because men feel so driven that they have to bounce their eyes, they have to look away. And women in the church have said, why won't you even look at me? I'm missing the ability to connect with good men. Right? So, being able to do something with what moves in you. For example, I can give the example. I was at my local Costco as a Costco member, and I was pumping gas, in the 20 or 30 islands of gas that they have, right? And the hundreds of cars lined up. And this one night it was after work, and I was noticing on the island, the other side of the island, the gas pump island, was a very beautiful woman pumping gas. She was well dressed. She appeared to me to be on her way to some event. It didn't look like, just formal business attire. It looked like she was on her way to something, a dinner with friends, a theater production. I don't know, but I was moved by her beauty. And again, it's washed over me. I just looked over. Wow, beautiful woman. Again, right away, I have a choice. What am I going to do with what just moved in me? I have to do something. So, having written this book and reflected on these things and being a man who wants to honor God, I sat back and said, what does she stir in me? What's going on in me? Usually it'll take you to primary needs. And what I thought right away is, I am so tired. When I connected to my body, I was aware of my own tiredness. I was coming off of work, and it was a season of a lot of work. And I thought to myself, what stirs in me by her is I want to be the kind of man who lives with that level of dignity. She looked like a woman who knew how to care for herself, held herself well. I want to be the kind of man who's on the way to a dinner party or a theater production, meaning it made me have to connect with my own longings for dignity, for rest, right? All of that was what was stirring in me. And so I was able to have a conversation with God out of that, and really was able to actually, bless that woman. I drove away from the gas pump thanking God for that woman. Thank you, God, that woman, was living her life in such a way that she took care of herself, because it's inspired me to want to also take care of myself. That's the kind of gratitude and work. Now that took intention on my part, right? You've got to be aware of your own arousal. You've got to be aware when someone stirs you, and you've got to do something with it. Now, I'm not saying you have to spend an hour journaling, right? But you've got to do maybe, but you need to do something. You need to invite, okay, I'm stirred. Where does this take me? What does this person draw up in me? What am I wanting? What am I missing? What am I longing for? Right? What's the story I want to write in my head about them?
Yeah, that's not the typical response that we go to, is it?
No.
Yeah.
Right. Most men are just told, well, men, they're just virile.
Yeah.
It's lust.
Boys are going to be boys.
Right. Man, you can probably not even help it, barely. It's going to have to, and it's so, I hope as a man, you just feel so condescended to by that. Right? Like, you're just an animal. Boys will be boys. I hope something in you says, no, you are a phenomenally developed person. You are an intricate person. You are capable of just as much depth as a woman. You're not just a dumb guy, right? Who's, men.
Yeah.
That should make you angry, because you actually have an intricate inner heart and emotional life. And it's good that you would tune into it.
That's interesting you bring that up. So what happened to the man's heart?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, $1 million question, right?
It is. Yeah.
That was, as the subtitle of my book, Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality. I was all about getting the heart back, in writing that book. And I think of the research of a woman. She's not a woman of faith that I know of. Her name is Peggy Orenstein, and she is a journalist. She did a lot of interviews with young men and young women, like college age-ish men and women, to find, try to get the pulse of what's going on in sex culture at large. Her one sentence conclusion about all of that journalism work, like hundreds of interviews, was when it comes to sex, women need to learn to connect to their bodies more. Men need to learn to connect to their hearts more around sex. And she was calling out how, again, men seem to have this disconnect from their hearts around sex. I think any man alive has at some level some division between their body and heart around sex. Some of that is the very thing we're talking about. You're told you're an animal. Well, you are just sort of your body lusts, right? And we don't think to reflect on what's going on in our hearts. And then I get men, and I would say also this, we often say, well, sex is for men, romance is for women, right? Women want romance and men want sex. That is so condescending. It's so wrong. I get men all the time in my office saying, and sadly, they say it this way, I guess I'm more like the woman in the relationship because I want the emotional stuff. Right? What's wrong that we have to hide that men want emotional connection? Every man I've ever met wants emotional connection, whether he's connected to it or not. So at some level, what is the heart of masculine sexuality? What's the punchline of the book? It's that you're a lover. You were made to be a lover. You're a deeply, fully capable lover. You have all that you need with God to emotionally connect deeply, to sensually connect, to enact the adventure of love, right? What I call romance, to pursue for deep connection, emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, to attend to your partner's needs. You are fully wired to be able to do all of that with God. You're a lover. What did the first man who ever met a naked woman do? Right? This is Adam in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
He broke out in a poem.
Yes, he did.
Right? And in other words, there's the lover.
Right.
You think of Song of Songs.
Mm-hmm.
This is not just a guy trying to get some.
Right.
Right? He's waxing eloquent of all the sensual things of his life, right? He's a shepherd. So, the goats, how your hair's like the goats of Bashan, coming down, or Mount Lebanon, whatever it is. And like, he's a poet. Now, I'm not saying you have to be a poet, but I'm saying you are fully capable of it. You're meant to be a lover through and through.
This is why chicks dig musicians.
Yeah.
They're poets, right?
Right.
Yeah. They're writing these songs and they love that.
Right. And what's a lover? A lover is somebody that can awe. A lover is somebody that can take in the sensual experience of life and have a response to it that's reverent. So, that doesn't have to mean poetry, but it could mean, I think of like, men that learn. I have a friend that, he smokes meat. He's a good cook. And the way he talks about the sensuality of cooking meat, right? You just hear hints of the lover self, right? We think of David, King David. He's a poet. He's a warrior, but he's also a lover. And so being able to connect to your emotional self and know what to do with that is an important part of being a lover.
Yeah, I think you've made us hungry for barbecue now. So,
touche.
So, Sam, one of the things that I think people want to know is, how do I get from brokenness to healing? And so, in the limited amount of time that we have, and of course, I want to encourage everyone to pick up Sam's book because he walks through this very carefully, but just kind of whet our appetite as to give us a roadmap on how we can head from brokenness to healing in our sexuality.
Yeah, it's got to start with you actually believe God meant that the kindness of God will lead you to repentance, that God is actually who he says he is. He's slow to anger, he's rich in love, that he actually wants to be generous with you, that he actually is you have to believe the scandal of grace. And then I'm asking you to take a risk on that. What does that mean? It means more than just confessing your sins in your closet, in your journal, in your car, and hoping they go away. That hasn't worked. So, being able to say, I am going to take a deeper look at myself. I am going to take more seriously the reality of my pattern, right? Not just seeing it as behavior, not just seeing yourself as simplistic. Well, I'm just, a guy who lusts. No, that's not true. You're actually made to be a lover. You're made to be this deep-hearted person, so that you get a little angry with shame, right? And you say, I'm tired of the voices of shame that tell me all the time I'm a terrible person. That's all I am, right? That you decide, I'm going to risk on the kindness of God. And it means breaking silence somewhere with someone. You're going to talk about and answer really this one question, the same question to Adam and Eve. Where are you? Where are you right now? Where are you sexually? What's going on? To just sit with, not how did you get there and, oh my gosh, to beat yourself up, but to just sit with, where are you right now? What's going on for you sexually? And then I think along with that kindness, kindness in the right hand, curiosity in the left hand. That what you begin to do is address, sure, there's places I've joined my heart to lust and sin, covetousness, power. Lust is mostly about power, by the way. Lust is also, I would say, in most men's lives, though, an act of emotional self-regulation, right? That most of our sexual acting out is some form and some attempt at soothing, right? And so I'm asking you to begin to look at, what do I need soothing for? What am I trying to get comfort for? Right? What happens biochemically in the body through an orgasm? It is wildly comforting, right? There are endorphins, but there's also something called oxytocin, right? It's called the cuddle hormone in research because it's the hormone that makes you feel close. When you feel touched or hugged or held by somebody who loves you, you get a hit of oxytocin, right? It's meant to bond lovers in sex, right? Oxytocin, that they feel closer after sex, and more intimate. So I'm inviting you to start to sit with, what are you trying to regulate? What are you trying to soothe in your life? What's overwhelming you? So now we're not just in sin, lust, power, covetousness, but in soothing, comfort, overwhelm, anxiety. Oh my gosh, to be a pastor and to be a source of people's comfort in their worst moments or their best moments, you have a staggering job, right? To be, a community source of comfort and authority and soothing. And so, my goodness, you need that yourself. And so being able to honor yourself as a creature, I would say for most men, it's, and I think this comes from Chuck DeGroat, who works with pastors. He said the two things he sees for emotional regulation are alcohol and pornography use among pastors. And I wonder how that would resonate with even your work.
No, it's right on the mark, actually.
Okay. And I would say, of course, those two. Mm-hmm. Did you want to say more there?
No, I'm just saying what you're saying about soothing we are substituting sex for a true need, right? And whether that's in pornography or even alcohol or even our own spouse. And I can't tell you how many spouses I listen to say, I am just his tension reliever. There's something deeper going on in their soul that needs to be addressed.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And again, those two things, sex and alcohol, are biochemically, right? What they do to the body, they are such high regulators. Alcohol is a vasodilator. It will chemically relax you. If given enough alcohol, you will relax. So, right, and the same with sex. Orgasm is a very reliable soother. And so I'm asking you to explore that category for yourself. Where do you get healthy forms of soothing? Or what are you trying to soothe? Is it your own past trauma? Is it, I would say it always has roots in your story at some level, right? But it may look like, well, it's just my hard day. Okay. But what about your day? What has been overwhelming? Usually that has symbolic connections to your own story. And so being able to just even reflect on what's your history of soothing? What's your history of touch? Where do you hold stories where you weren't soothed? Where you were left in traumatic stress? Or chronic stress, chronic states of aloneness, or terror, or pain. Being able to start to ask questions about, back to curiosity, not just what am I soothing, but then now what is my story? What are my core wounds? And what kind of comfort did I not get or get in those? Right? You've got to pull the thread back to the language of symbolism. Here's a probably one that feels even a bit more scandalous. What do you look at with pornography? Right? Another path into this, a huge clue, is the terrain and the content of your fantasies, your fetishes. Right? What do you look at?
So, at the risk of asking this question, I'm going to ask it.
Yeah.
So, are you talking about in a particular fantasy that we're looking at, it can help identify the issue that we're dealing with emotionally?
Yes.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yes, absolutely. So I was working with a man. He's coming home from work. And this man is not a pastor. He was a contractor, actually. He texts his wife, or calls his wife on the way home, and she needed some things for the meal she was making for them from the grocery store. So he goes to the grocery store, he gets a bunch of things, and comes home. He's forgotten something on the list. Now she can't finish the meal. She gets frustrated with him, right? I can't believe I forgot that. I don't remember what the conversation was. That night, so he feels hurt. He feels a rift with them. And later that night, he looks at pornography. Then he comes into me for counseling, and I have permission to share this story, and I've changed some details. But he comes in for counseling and confesses to me, Sam, I looked at pornography again. Which is always a brave admission. And then my next question is, what did you look at? And first of all, he told me the story I just told you, the context. And he sat back, and he'd done some of this work. So this was a little bit of an okay question for him. But it can feel like, isn't that what I'm trying to forget? I'm trying to shut out what I looked at, right? Because wasn't that what caused me lust? I'm trying to forget the pornography I looked at. And I would say, well, don't forget it too soon. Because here's what this man said. He said, if I'm honest, I was looking for a woman in pornography with a really genuine smile. And he began to cry. Right? And can we all hear? And he was able to make the connection as soon as he said that. Oh my goodness. I had held my wife's frustrated face. And rather than taking the risk to go repair with her, because she was a good woman, he decided to take his need or his desire to pornography. So he was looking for a woman in pornography with a genuine smile. And you might say, well, gosh, why didn't he just go to his wife? Well, there's an even deeper story in his life around a woman's smile. And as we began to unpack that, he began to connect. The only time I ever got my mother's delight, the only time I ever got my mother's smile is when I would give her back rubs. And she would share her heartache about my dad. And she would tell me how grateful and pleased she was in me. And I saw her smile. Can you begin to hear the setup in this man's story? That is a story of sexual harm. That his mother set him up to hear her heartache about his dad? That's not appropriate. Right? And it was in the context of touch. And I would just want you to hear, all of that followed because he was able to be curious with the content of his fantasy. And again, this is tricky. How do we step into it without being triggered again by the very content we're trying to forget? Right? That's why you need to do this in community with God, a counselor, somewhere where you're beginning to try to connect with the symbolism in your fantasies. Because, when you suppress things, right? Again, back to that language of shame, we hide. Fantasy is one place the subconscious shows up to play. Most guys don't type in Google porn. Enter. Most guys type in a certain word or a certain set of words, right? I want to look for this. Or even if they are just starting from just porn, what's guiding your clicks from website to website or page to page or picture or video to picture or video, right? There's something that is animating that search. And I'm asking you to connect with the symbolism of that fantasy.
Yeah. That's really good, because a lot of times in our counseling sessions, especially when I'm leading that session and we get to these issues, oftentimes there's an underlying issue. I always tell my clients most of the time, your problem's not your problem. There's something underneath where it is birthed.
Right.
And it needs to be revealed. And that is an excellent story to help share with us what you were talking about. That's really good.
Yeah,
go ahead.
If I can just say this.
Yeah.
Porn is an attempt at a solution. What you're naming so well, the problem is not the problem. We often say, well, porn's the problem. I would say, no, porn is your attempt at a solution. Yes. Porn is your attempt at emotional regulation.
Yes.
Porn is your attempt at comfort. For what?
Yes.
Just like you're naming. What's the problem behind the problem?
Right.
What are you actually trying to comfort?
And oftentimes spouses feel inadequate. They're not enough. And in reality, they're not the issue.
Yes. Yes.
And they need to hear that.
Yes, that's right.
Now, but it feels personal, right?
Yes. And at some level, it is personally impactful. And again, that's where I'd want to say, of course they feel wounded. There is betrayal in taking your sexuality somewhere else. But I would agree that, you've got to be able to sit with, this is their choice. Their addiction, their compulsion is their work, right? If what they say is, well, you don't something enough, right? If what this, counseling client of mine did is said, well, my wife didn't smile at me. It's her fault. She was angry. See, it's her fault. I would say, no, you never risked on her. Is she responsible for her irritation? Sure. But to say, well, that's what caused it. Oh, no, right? You made a choice to avoid her. And so, you know, you need to be able to sit with, this is squarely on the person who's acting out. Now, there may be marriage issues going on, right? But that's not the front issue. And the compulsive behavior needs to be addressed first.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you for that. That's brought a lot of clarity, I believe, for a lot of our listeners today. And it's been really helpful to have you walk through that, because so many of them are confused as to why they're doing what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And that's been so helpful. Thank you, Sam, for that. Mm-hmm. Now, Sam, we're coming up on the end of our time together, but I want to ask you, is there anything that you want to say that you haven't had the opportunity to share with us today?
You know, I will end with, you know, the absolute burning heartbeat of why I wrote the book, and what I would want you to hear. If you hear nothing else, I want you to hear your sexual innocence can be recovered. Your innocence can be recovered. You aren't too far gone. And I want to invite you to get angry at the voices of shame that say, sorry, you're too broken. You're too much of a mess. You're too perverted, too disgusting, too dirty. That's straight from hell, against your heart. You know, God invites us to receive the kingdom like a child. He wouldn't say that if he thought it was impossible for us. I think what he's saying there is you need to receive the kingdom with innocence and awe. And I think that's deeply possible if you do this work. So I hope at some level you're a little bit angry at the voices of shame in your life. I hope you begin to turn the tables on them, and say, I'm made for more than this. I'm made for more than this. You know, your first act of self-love and recovery will be that kind of kindness. I'm made for more than this.
Yes, that is so helpful. Thank you, Sam. That's really encouraging. Now, if people want to connect with you, how can they best do that?
Yeah, you know, you can go to my website, samjolman.com. I have offerings there. And then I write on Substack as well, samjolman.substack.com. Ongoing conversations there on topics of sexuality and healthy sexuality. And then we have a monthly conversation on those. If you become a paid member for $5 a month, would love to have you join those riveting conversations. Really good people show up to that, and I'm always amazed by them. And then I, of course, would love to have you read my book. You can get it wherever you buy your books or listen to your books. It's on Audible. And I got to narrate it, which was huge honor. So I'd actually love to talk to you there as well.
Yeah, that is a great book. And I want to encourage everyone to get out there and buy that. We guys, there's so much we could have gotten to today, but we really felt like this is where the Lord headed this conversation.
Yeah.
And I want to challenge you to get the book. There's so much more there than this conversation. We just scratched the surface today, Sam.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful that you took time to be with our audience, and we're grateful for your ministry.
Robby, it's such an honor to be here, and thank you for hosting these conversations and for your heart for pastors.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Well, God bless Sam, and those of you who are listening today, thank you for joining us on the Care for Pastors podcast. Bye. As we wrap up today's conversation with Sam Jolman, I hope you're reminded of something deeply important. Healing is possible. Shame doesn't get the last word, and your story isn't over. But walking in freedom isn't just about personal wholeness. It's about perseverance. And next week on the Care for Pastors podcast, I sit down with John Harvey, who reflects on 36 years of ministry. John opens up about the real journey of pastoral leadership, the triumphs, the trials, the joys, and the heartbreak. We talk about longevity in ministry, what does it take to last, and how do you protect your marriage and your children while leading a church? And how do pride and insecurity quietly sabotage the leader? And what do you do when betrayal cuts deep? And how do you guard your heart against temptation over decades, not just a season? John speaks candidly about failure, faithfulness, accountability, and the power of community. And after more than 3 decades of shepherding God's people, he answers the question every weary pastor eventually asks, was it worth it? You won't want to miss this honest and hope-filled conversation. Until next time, remember, you are called, you're not alone, and by God's grace, you can finish well. We'll see you next week on the Care for Pastors podcast. Thank you for joining us.